FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome. You are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz, and today is June 2nd, 2020. Well, it seems like we've been down this road many times before in many different circumstances, but it all comes down to, do you give the people the opportunity to do the right thing, or do you force them to do what you believe to be the right thing? And who decides what the right thing is and how it should be implemented? I think these are age-old questions that we've been dealing with since probably going back to the Sumerians, going back to the Babylonians. That's as far back as our recorded history goes, in China as well. And we're going to talk about that. I'd like to know your opinion. Does responsible policy start at the barrel of a gun, or with voluntary compliance and corroboration and the human desire to do the right thing? What's your opinion? Please email me, kl@kerrylutz.com, kl@kerrylutz.com. Right now, got a special guest here. His name is Antony Davies, and a professor at Duquesne University in Pittsburgh. Professor, it's really great to have you on the show here. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
So, the book, it is, I think it has the potential to be a classic, Cooperation and Coercion. And we were talking before we started here, and you explained to me that it all comes down to one or the other, right?
It does. Now, I and my colleague, James Harrigan, I'm an economist, he's a political scientist, wrote this book. It's not for academics. This is for general consumption. And what we do here is lay out an argument that every endeavor that humans undertake, we undertake either under cooperative principles or coercive principles. And cooperative principles are, we get together and we do something, and as long as I like what's happening and you like what's happening, the thing continues, and at any point, either one of us can say, I've had enough of this, I walk away. That's cooperation. Under coercion, we have a group of people, you can think of it as the government, who makes decisions and imposes those decisions by force on the rest of us. And our argument here is not that one is better than the other, but rather that there are specific problems that we can solve better with one versus the other. And our tendency in this country, at least over the past 40 or 50 years, has been that we see a problem and we immediately turn to Washington and we say, fix this. We're asking for a coercive solution. But government is a powerful tool, but I liken it to a chainsaw as opposed to a magic wand. It's a powerful tool. There are certain problems that only it can solve, but those problems are few and far between. If you start waving it around at every problem that comes along, you're just going to hurt people.
I couldn't agree with you more. And it really comes down to that, like not making it political. But one side of the equation is always proclaiming the virtues of education. Everyone needs to be educated. And then implementing policies to force people to do things. And the fact of the matter is, if we educate people the way that they should be about an issue, all the facts, people will over time do the right thing. And I think back, Professor, to my youth, where well over half the population smoked cigarettes. Now, you could agree or disagree with the benefits of nicotine consumption, and maybe nicotine is not that dangerous, but it's the chemicals they put into it, whatever. The fact is, over time, cigarettes are going to have a highly negative effect upon your health. They're just going to. There can't be any debate about that for most people who indulge them regularly, whether it's half a pack a day or more. It's going to have a deleterious effect upon your health. And we've had this drummed into us, the Surgeon General's warning, health classes in school. And movies, the culture. And what do we see now? Less than 20% of the population smokes cigarettes. And that's a perfect example where they could have just outlawed nicotine. Oh, look how much money it would have saved the public health system. But then we'd have a black market in cigarettes, and this problem probably would have gotten worse.
I think you're absolutely correct. And when we take a coercive approach, for example, we're just going to ban cigarettes. What we're doing is we're having a small group of people, our elected politicians and their bureaucrats, make a decision for the rest of us without understanding the particular circumstances, limitations that apply to individuals. Now, the fact is, some people, even to this day, some people smoke. Why is that? Well, it's pleasurable. And you could say, well, it's bad for your health. Okay, but there are plenty of things that are bad for my health that are pleasurable, right down to, driving a little bit too fast down the road. But there are other things. For example, people who are working multiple jobs to make ends meet at the lower end of the economic spectrum, the stimulative effects of nicotine helped keep them going. Now, I'm not saying that this is necessarily a good thing, and we can argue about whether they should be working multiple jobs, but the fact is that's where they are. And for those people, yes, they understand that this has a negative effect on their health, but they have to weigh that against their particular circumstances and come to a decision that's right for them. And that's the essence of cooperation, making decisions for yourself and living with the consequences of those decisions. With coercion, you don't get that tailored solutions to many different people. You get one solution being imposed on everyone.
Yeah, cookie cutter solutions. And maybe you can control your smoking habit. Maybe you'll only smoke 3 cigarettes a day, 4 or 5. And that isn't necessarily going to kill you or have a really negative outcome on your health. And yet, the government will always look for a way to assert its will. Let's bring this to the pandemic and the mandatory lockdowns that have occurred across the country and across the world. So in most countries, Professor, it's not even an issue that the government has the power to order the lockdown or whether they should. There is no debate about it. But in these here United States, there's a major debate about it. What's your take on it?
I think that when you're talking about something like the lockdown, the best thing to do, and I don't know whether President Trump did this deliberately or not, but the fact is what we got in the end was a situation where the federal government stepped back and let the states make decisions for themselves. And what you got was a variety of answers, because what works in New York State doesn't work in Colorado. It doesn't work in something different works in California. If you leave the decisions at the lowest possible level, the state, or even preferably at the local level, the people who are in charge there in the government can take into account circumstances that are particular to that area. And what we got, for example, as we look at this nationwide, the COVID problem, not entirely, but largely is a New York City problem. The solutions that work for New York City aren't going to work in the heartland of the U.S., where New York City has to be incredibly concerned about flattening the curve and how many people are getting infected. In the heartland, yes, COVID is a concern, but the much greater concern is I've got to feed my family. And how am I going to earn money because my business has been shut down? And so to the extent that we push these decisions to a lower governmental level, a state level, or even the local level, you can get the politicians taking into account the individual circumstances in a way that can't be done if you turn to Washington and say, give us a wall-to-wall solution.
And that is such a great point. And a cookie cutter solution, because look, South Dakota's got like no people and they're so spread out apart. They have no mass transit. And their issues with COVID-19 are nothing like the issues of New York City with its filthy, disgusting subway system and filthy streets and densely populated areas. The whole place is densely populated, let's face it. So why should that state have a different shouldn't have a different solution than New York. But even in New York, it's all about coercion, isn't it?
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next.
Arcana Corporation is on the verge of bringing the world's highest grade silver mine into production. The Revenue Virginius mine in Colorado has proven improbable silver reserves grading nearly 37 ounces per ton silver with an all-in sustaining production cost of only US $8 per ounce of silver. The mine is fully permitted with infrastructure already in place, and the company has announced they plan to commence production in 2020. Achieving successful production usually results in a significant upward share price re-rating on the Lassonde curve. Arcana trades under the ticker AUN in Toronto and AUNFF in New York. To learn more, go to arcana.com. That's AURCANA.com.
The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
It is. And that's the political nature of New York. It tends to move in that direction. One of the nice things about governing like this at a low level is that you get a lot of experiments. And thank God for Sweden. Sweden was one of the few countries that did not impose a lockdown. And it now serves as an example to us. And we can look at it and see that their problem is not nearly as bad as what the models suggested. In fact, it's not much worse than what we have here in the United States with the lockdown.
It's the same.
Yeah. And so we have a bunch of experiments and we can point to them and say, well, this worked better here versus something else that was tried over there, so that the next time, and there will be a next time, something like a COVID comes along, we can step back and say, wait a minute, we've been here before, we saw what worked, we saw what didn't, and we can be smarter about the decisions we make.
So it's such a great point. And, the other thing is Georgia ended their lockdown ahead of everyone else. Florida, where I live, started it later and has ended a large portion of it. What's happened in those states? We're a lot like Sweden in that regard.
Yeah, that's correct.
So coercion, we look to New York City, New York State. The governor of the state, Andrew Cuomo, orders infected COVID-19 patients to be taken from the hospitals to the nursing homes. And now he can't understand why there's upwards of 10,000 nursing home deaths. A clear case of coercion and its potential negative results, isn't it?
Yeah, it very much is. That was an incredibly stupid thing to do. The most at-risk population are those that we find in nursing homes. Now, notice a difference between cooperation and coercion. It's not that we're going to make mistakes with coercion and we won't make mistakes with cooperation. It's the same fallible human beings on both sides of the equation. The difference is when we make a mistake in a cooperative venture, we all have the ability to walk away, to say, this is stupid, it isn't working, I'm going to go do something else. But in a coercive environment, you don't have the ability to walk away. In fact, if anything, the people involved, talk about Cuomo, in realizing he's made a mistake, actually has an incentive to double down on it, to pretend that it wasn't a mistake.
And that it's Trump's fault, right?
Sure. And you see this repeatedly with government. Things that don't work in government get more money. In the private sector, things that don't work get less money.
And go out of business, hopefully.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally see your point here. I mean, you kind of preach into the choir. But how do we make it a more cooperative society and a less coercive one? Because clearly the trend has been towards coercion. I mean, that's what political power is about. And we're seeing in the lockdowns, certain governors, certain states, and it transcends party affiliation, have really gone authoritarian on us, and others have gone more libertarian on us. Libertarianism says every person should be free to enter into transactions with others as long as they're not intending to do harm to the other or to themselves or society, effectively saying, free association, freedom to go about your business. But yet, a lot of these states have been totally authoritarian in their approach.
They have been. And part of this goes to the nature of politicians. They need to be seen to be doing something. And if they aren't doing something, then whatever bad comes to pass, we point to them and say, well, this happened because you didn't do anything. And I think the smarter approach here is not to discount government, but rather to keep it on the back burner. Let people through cooperation try and find their own solutions first. And we have a good example here with COVID. One of the things that happened very early on is that grocery stores started setting aside the first couple hours of the day. And they said, in these first couple of hours, we're only going to allow the elderly into the grocery store because they're the most susceptible population. And why the early morning hours? Because it's at that point at which the store is cleanest. It's just been cleaned from the night before, and nobody's coming through tracking germs. And all of this happened through cooperation. There was no government edict. Some grocery store somewhere came up with this idea, and other grocery stores said, oh my God, that's brilliant. They started doing it. And before you know it, we're doing it coast to coast voluntarily. So a good approach here is to let people come up with their own solutions first before stepping in with government. Because if you step in first with government, you shut off a lot of these possible solutions that people could have come up with because you've tied their hands now.
Yeah. And you know that people are going to say, Professor, that, this is the old world. You're not up to date here. Things just can't work that way anymore. What are you talking about? Blah, blah, blah. What's your answer to that? And that can it work in a modern era?
Well, I think we have so many examples of it, we aren't even aware. So think about things like the airline industry versus Amtrak. Think about FedEx versus the Postal Service. Think about private education versus public education. We have plenty of examples in which we have a government entity doing something similar to what's done in the private sector. Not to say either one of them get it right all the time, but on average, the private sector tends to get it right more often and at lower cost. Why? Because people have the ability to walk away if they don't like what's being offered. They don't have that ability with the government sector. In fact, it's the reverse. As people stop riding Amtrak complains that they can't remain solvent, and so they ask for more money from Congress. So they get rewarded with more money for doing a job that people don't want them to do.
Or the post office, too, is a perfect example of that, right?
Absolutely. And this is not, I want to underline this. I'm not saying here that the people who work in the post office or for the government are stupid or lazy or anything like that. That's not the point. The point is the system. There's a feedback mechanism with cooperation where if you give me what I want, I will continue to engage with you. That feedback mechanism doesn't occur with coercion in the governmental sector. And so when you get good people who are competent and productive in government, and there are plenty of them like that, but when you find them, that's by accident. There's nothing in the system to promote that kind of behavior.
I could not agree with you more, and you've kind of come to the crux of the problem, and that is, are there places where we do need coercion, where we do need, the ability to actually force people to do what the government wants them to do?
Yeah, that's a good question. And the answer is absolutely there is. Probably the most fundamental is in the realm of property rights. And when I say property rights, I don't simply mean my owning stuff, but my being secure in my person, my owning myself. A good role for government is to prevent people from imposing harm on me by taking my stuff, by harming me physically, by dumping trash on my property or in the air. That's an absolutely right role for government. But things like deciding how much sugar should be in the things I drink or what I should put into my body, this is not a role for government. That's a role for cooperation.
Right. So I totally get what you're saying there. It makes complete sense. But what about in military conflicts and that type of thing?
Well, I don't think you have much choice there. You can't conduct military operations on a cooperative level. That you have to have coercion. But here's the interesting thing: when we make the argument, well, we need government because we need a military. Well, why do you need a military? It's to protect you against the other guy's military, which is supported by their government. In other words, you've just made an argument that we need government to protect ourselves from other people's government.
Well, if it was up to us and the Chinese or the Russians, we'd all be out drinking and having a party. But it's not. And so government becomes the ultimate protection scam then, doesn't it?
Well, it does in a sense, but what we've seen, and this is very clear in the data, countries that are more cooperative, they let their people make decisions for themselves, these sorts of things, they're more open to trade with other countries. Those countries tend to get involved in military conflicts much less than others. And if you think it through, it kind of makes sense. If I have a business or I'm even a customer and I'm doing business with someone in some foreign country, I have connections with those people in that foreign country. And any kind of military conflict with that country is going to be detrimental both to the business I'm doing and also at a personal level. If I know these people, these are friends of mine, and what's going on here? And so the populations of both countries will be much more reticent to allow their governments to become involved, come into conflict militarily.
Yeah, hey, I would hope that would be the case, and the fact is, generally, democracies don't go about attacking one another, right? It's unusual for one democracy to attack another. Even the United States, and we've had our share of countries that we've attacked, right?
Absolutely.
So,
and it's been declining worldwide for the past 3/4 of a century.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
we see it in the news, but we have to remember that the news is in the business of selling advertising, which means they're going to show us things that are salacious and out of the ordinary. But if you actually look at the numbers, the number of deaths due to military conflict has declined on the order of 90% over the past 3/4 of a century.
Yeah, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing. So finally, what can you as the individual do to get your government to be more inclined to look for corroborative solutions rather than coercive ones?
I would say don't look for the politician who says, I have a plan to fix this. Look for the politician who says, that is outside my authority.
Mm-hmm. So the one that declines power rather than the one that embraces it, huh?
The one who uses power as a last resort, not as a first option.
Yes. And let's face it, there are times when you need coercive things like putting down an insurrection, stopping riots. You can't just look for a corroborative decision because you've already gotten past that. Where force is required, coercion will follow.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I think you've enlightened us a lot. Just tell us, Professor, where do we find your book and where do we find out more about you?
You can find our book on Amazon. It's Cooperation and Coercion. And I and James Harrigan, my co-author, have a weekly podcast, Words and Numbers, which you can find on all the podcast players and at wordsandnumbers.org.
All right. Wordsandnumbers.org. We really appreciate you coming on, Professor. Any questions or comments? What is your opinion about this? I have a feeling that most of you out there are more libertarian, freedom-oriented people who really think that force should be the last choice, not the first, and only in situations where it's absolutely necessary and where the majority of people agree that it's necessary. We'd love to hear from you at kl@kerrylutz.com, kl@kerrylutz.com, Twitter feed @KerryLutz, Facebook page Financial Survival Network. And Professor, thanks so much. We wish you the best of luck on the book. And again, the book is Cooperation and Coercion, and you can get it at Amazon. Hey, good luck, Professor. We'll talk to you again real soon, I hope.
My pleasure. Thank you.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.